Pokemon Day, on February 27th, has turned into this kind of tradition ever since the 20th anniversary in 2016, when many said the series finally started treating its own birthday. Like an event, some claimed that every year would bring something bigger than the last. And although the rumors are false in that strict sense, the pattern has become clear. New generations revealed on modern hardware remakes and Legend-style spin-offs placed carefully between them, and special in-game events or gifts that pull players back into titles they thought they had finished long ago. Over time, the day has grown beyond a single trailer or announcement. According to some, it now feels more like a cross-media signal, the moment when games, mobile titles, anime, and the trading card game quietly line up for the year ahead. Pokemon Go gets its themed raids and bonuses. Masters, EX, and Cafe Remix promise limited banners and costumes. Unite and Sleep tease new modes or small balance changes. And somewhere, a new anime arc or TCG set is timed to echo whatever region or mechanic is about to define the next phase of the series. This slow journey is going to move through all of that at a measured pace. Instead of racing from headline to headline, each possibility will be treated like a bedtime story about a rumor that could come true. One common rumor is that a Pokemon Day 2026 Presents might open with a soft montage of the franchise history before fading into footage of a new region. Others focus on DLC epilogues for Scarlet and Violet, or another Legends experiment, set in a familiar land, but tonight nothing is confirmed. Everything is just gently considered as the list unfolds. Players will move from console games to mobile updates, then to anime projects, merchandise, TCG sets, and even small quality-of-life patches, each one described as if it were a quiet announcement card turned over on a table. And somewhere underneath all of those smaller ideas, the first big question waits is Pokemon Day 2026, the moment the world finally meets Generation 11. Or is that reveal still being held back in the dark, just out of sight? So to understand why that question feels so heavy around Pokemon Day, 2026 players first have to drift back to where this date even comes from. Because February 27th is not just a marketing slot on a calendar. It is the quiet echo of the original Japanese release of Red and Green in 1996, a moment that some claimed would be a small RPG experiment, and nothing more yet. Over time, that launch date slowly hardened into a kind of ritual marker for the series itself. Did you know? It was not until the 20th anniversary in 2016 that this memory really turned into a yearly anchor, as the Pokemon Company began treating Pokemon Day as a stage instead of just an anniversary card. And from that point onward, many presentations settled around this late February window. Sometimes as full Pokemon Presents broadcasts, sometimes as smaller announcements, but always framed as if the games were returning to their own birthday party. Players can remember how certain years stand out in a haze of trailers and theme songs. One common rumor is that every major generation has been revealed on Pokemon Day itself. However, this was easily debunked when timelines were compared. Yet the date has still carried some of the most important reveals, from new region teases to remake confirmations, and even Legend-style spin-offs that reimagined familiar worlds as distant folklore rather than modern journeys. According to some, the most striking pattern is not a single trailer, but the way the franchise's different branches all seem to bend toward that same morning. Games will show a logo or a few seconds of footage. The anime will tease a new arc or protagonist shift. The TCG will flip over artwork for an upcoming set, and mobile titles like Pokemon Go or Masters EX will quietly promise limited events, banners, or crossovers, as if the entire brand has been tuned to the same frequency. This rumor likely stems from players noticing that even smaller projects, such as web series shorts or quality of life patches, are timed to echo the main reveals. And over nearly a decade, this coordination has turned Pokémon Day into less of a single announcement and more of a synchronized pulse where every part of the series briefly aligns before drifting apart again. For the rest of the year, by the time the calendar reaches 2026, that pulse sits at an odd crossroads because the Nintendo Switch era that began back in 2017 is nearing the kind of lifespan where hardware usually changes form, and many have quietly said that the next system could already be humming in the background, which means any Pokémon Day around that threshold starts to feel like a hinge between devices, generations, and even design philosophies. Players looking at 2026 can sense that hinge in the air as they wonder whether this will be the dawn of a new machine, with a new region built around it, or the soft closing chapter of the current era, tying up threads through one last mainline reveal before everything tilts and the next section will move slowly into that possibility, tracing how a new flagship game might choose to introduce itself on that particular morning, and what kind of region would dare to stand at the edge of a changing console world. So if that next flagship game does exist, in some hidden build somewhere, quietly running on a development kit in an office you will never see, then one possible future for Pokémon Day 2026 is that the presentation does not explode into trailers and menus right away, but instead slows down. The usual upbeat music softens, and the screen simply fades to black. For a moment longer than feels comfortable, as if the signal has dropped, before a single new logo begins to glow in the dark, like a nightlight in a quiet room. Players have seen this kind of restraint before. Because did you know the series often prefers to start a new generation with a silhouette or a title card rather than a full tour? So in this case, the camera could drift over a faint outline of a landmass, just a region-shaped shadow, turning slowly against a starry sky or a stormy ocean with only a few tiny lights hinting at cities, while a distant cry from an unfamiliar Pokémon echoes once and then fades, leaving players to wonder if this is urban, ancient, futuristic, or something stranger that sits between those ideas. Historically, the timing would not be impossible either, since new generations tend to arrive when Nintendo's current hardware has settled into a rhythm. And many said that each leap from Game Boy to DS to Switch brought with it a fresh region built to show off what the system could handle. So according to some, if a Switch successor has taken center stage by 2026, a quiet Gen 10 teaser here could signal that the next big step is being prepared without anyone needing to say the words out loud in that kind of sleepy teaser. The information would likely be minimal on purpose. Maybe just a region name and a simple tagline. Something like a single sentence about journeys beginning where history and tomorrow collide, paired with a vague release window, such as late 2027, that glows beneath the logo for a few seconds before fading away again. And another rumor said that only a single visual clue, like a neon skyline or a crumbling temple overgrown with vines, would be enough to send players into months of speculation about whether this place is more like Lumio's city at midnight or Hisui at dawn. This pattern would fit with earlier first looks, or because one common rumor is that every new generation starts with a huge gameplay blowout. However, this was easily debunked by how gently the series eased into Kalos, Alola, Galar, and Paldea, with restrained announcements before deeper trailers arrived later in the year. And although the rumors are false, the expectation they created means that a soft, almost whispered Gen 11 reveal on Pokémon Day 2026 would feel both familiar and slightly eerie, like hearing footsteps at the end of a hallway without seeing who made them. If that happens, the rest of the presentation would probably turn its detailed attention elsewhere. perhaps towards something more fully formed, such as a return to Unova in a new style or era, now letting Generation 10 remain a shadow on the wall, while the next section of this imagined morning lingers on what a modern Unova project could look like when it finally steps into the light from there. The presentation in your mind drifts naturally toward Unova, almost as if the camera of this imaginary trailer turns and walks down a long, dark route lined with streetlights. Because did you know, for many players, black and white now sit in the same nostalgic place that gold and silver once did, old enough to feel distant, yet recent enough that the details still linger. By 2026, those games are well over a decade old, and some claimed that the series follows a quiet cycle, where each generation eventually returns in some new form. Whether it is a faithful remake like Heart Gold and Soul Silver, a reinterpretation like Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, or something stranger, like Legends, Arceus, so Unova naturally becomes the center of rumor and speculation. One common rumor is that a traditional black and white remake would appear first, perhaps shown in that sleepy morning, direct with a slow piano version of the title theme, the camera panning across Nimbasa's Ferris wheel and the Driftvale drawbridge, while familiar gym leaders are revealed in a slightly softer, modern art style. And according to some, this would be framed as a comfortable return, a way for players to revisit the original story almost untouched. Another rumor said that the approach could be more experimental, closer to how Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl handled Sinnoh, with a chibi reinterpretation that keeps the story intact, but shifts the visuals and pacing. And short clips might show the player avatar running through a toy-like Castelia city, the music brighter, the tone lighter, hinting that this version exists mainly to preserve the map and encounters rather than to reinvent them. However, this was easily debunked whenever players pointed to Game Freak's recent interest in open structures. Because in the background of all these discussions sits a third possibility, the one many quietly expect. A Legends-style Unova prequel, perhaps centered on N, the original dragon, or the founding of the region's cities. The trailer in this case would likely open on a foggy field instead of a bustling street. A lone trainer, walking toward ancient ruins where the two Tau dragons have not yet fully divided. The music sparse, with traditional instruments echoing what Legends Arceus did for Hisui. Although the rumors are false for now, players can almost see this version already. This rumor likely stems from how the Pokémon series has been experimenting with formats, first testing semi-open routes in Sword and Shield's wild area, then moving to the fragmented open zones of Legends, and later to the broader world of Paldea. Unova could easily become a testing ground, where nostalgia for linear routes blends with new mechanics, like seamless cities, vertical exploration in places like Mistralton's Cliffs, or more dynamic gym challenges. And if a Unova project appears in any form, its shape would ripple quietly through the rest of the announcements. An anime arc shifting toward N and Team Plasma, a TCG block themed around Reshiram and Zekrom, mobile tie-ins in Pokemon Go, or Masters EX revisiting Unova characters, seen all unfolding in the same calm broadcast, while the next part of this imagined direct turns to what else would have to move to match that return, and what might happen if Unova is not the only past region waking up. From there, players might see the presentation slow down, the music thinning out until only a soft piano remains, as the screen fades into a quiet Unovan evening, not with bold logos or flashing text, but with the Ferris wheel in Nimbasa turning slowly against a violet sky, or the Driftvale drawbridge stretching out under a steady curtain of rain, each light reflection on the water, acting as a silent signal that, did you know? This is Unova returning before anyone even says the word. The camera could linger on empty platforms, distant train cars, and the faint glow of street lamps, giving players just enough time to recognize the shapes and colors that once meant a whole region. Instead of rushing into battles, the trailer would likely lean on gentle, almost mundane comforts, showing autosave icons pulsing in the corner as a trainer steps out of a Pokemon Center, or seamless box access in the field as a mana is swapped in with no fanfare, as if this had always been there. Short shots might hint at updated breeding and training conveniences, with eggs hatching in streamlined animations, Eevee training tools presented in tidy menus, and accessibility options hovering in a settings screen. Things like text size, color filters, and control remapping, framed as quiet respect for how many different players grew up with black and white. None of this would be shouted. It would just be shown, as if the game is calmly reassuring everyone that the region remembers them. One common rumor is that a remake like this would launch with only the original Unova Pokédex, keeping the focus on the 150 or so regional species and their specific routes, while another rumor said that a broader national dex would be integrated from the start, letting older partners walk through Castelia on day one. The trailer could play with this tension by first focusing on Snivy, Tepig, and Oshawott, then slowly widening the frame to show silhouettes that might not have been there in 2010, leaving players unsure which roster they are actually seeing. According to some, this choice would quietly define the whole marketing message, either as a faithful memory or as a modern crossroads. If story footage appears, it might be brief but more cinematic, with N stepping through falling leaves in Accumula Town, or Reshiram and Zekrom framed in slower, almost reverent shots, while the narrator hints at truth and ideals without rewriting them, suggesting that the original themes remain intact, only staged with fuller camera work and voiced ambience rather than rewritten dialogue. Some claimed this kind of remake could even restore cut angles or unused storyboard ideas, though this is likely more hope than fact. Then the pattern could break. The screen might suddenly cut to an older Unova, sepia-toned, with primitive Pokeballs and unfamiliar clothes, signaling that instead of a straight remake, players are seeing a Legends-style experiment, something that reframes Unova's history entirely and shifts the tone of Pokemon Day 2026 from nostalgic comfort to quiet unease. This rumor likely stems from how Legends, Arceus reshaped Sinnoh, and it would leave the broadcast hanging on a different question, as the next section imagines what that kind of Unovan past would mean for every other announcement around it. So if that experiment really is a Legends-style project, players might see the trailer slow down even further, fading into something that feels more like a forgotten documentary than a game reveal, with the camera lingering on an old yellowed map of Unova, laid flat under candlelight, the edges burned and curled, faint ink lines tracing routes that do not quite match the modern region. In the distance, outside the map's frame, there could be the muffled sound of early machinery, and when the scene finally cuts, you might glimpse thin smokestacks on a gray horizon, hinting at an Unova that is just beginning to industrialize, rather than the bright metropolis players remember. Did you know a lot of players already imagine a proto-Castelia city as a kind of misty harbor town, with creaking wooden piers, and only a handful of low warehouses instead of skyscrapers, and a teaser could lean into that, showing a lone trainer in heavy travel-worn clothes walking past gas lamps and moored sailing ships, while unfamiliar, older Pokeball designs hang from their belt. According to some, a Legends. Unova concept like this would naturally echo Legends. Arceus, using that same idea of stepping into the region's formative years. But this time, the focus would not just be on catching Pokemon. It would be on the origin of Unova's mythology, the first written stories about its dragons, and the uneasy founding of its biggest cities. The trailer could show only fragments, the way Legends Arceus once did. Perhaps a semi-open marsh outside an early Nimbasa, where players watch a half-finished rail line cut through wild habitat. Or a research camp on a windswept bluff, where scholars record sightings of an unnamed original dragon in thick journals instead of on a Rotom phone. One common rumor is that such a game would add region-specific mechanics around early technology, like hand-cranked devices for surveying Pokémon habitats, or clunky prototype Pokeballs that misfire, alongside quiet cultural tensions between those who want to harness Pokémon for industry and those who insist the creatures remain sacred. Some claimed a Legends Unova would finally answer what really happened between the twin heroes, and a sleepy Pokémon Day teaser could tease that without explaining it, perhaps by showing two silhouetted figures standing on opposite sides of a crumbling stone bridge, Reshiram's flame and Zekrom's lightning flickering in the storm above, while a third, unseen presence shakes the frame. Although the rumors are false for now, even a single line of narration about the dragon before it was torn apart would be enough for many to say that long-debated theories about the original dragon, the relic castle, or even the abyssal ruins had just been quietly confirmed. By the end of that segment, players might be left with only a title card and a date, but the rest of the presentation would almost certainly start to mirror it, because if Unova is on the table in any form, a matching anime miniseries, a TCG block themed around the twin heroes and the original dragon, and coordinated mobile events would likely follow, which leads into how those cross-media announcements could quietly stack up around whatever main reveal Pokémon Day 2026 actually chooses. Once the cross-media Unova teases settle, the presentation would almost have to slow down again and turn back toward Paldea, because by Pokémon Day 2026, Scarlet and Violet would be in a strange, quiet phase of their lives, long past their main story, their 2 DLC waves, and any small epilogue updates that might have tied loose threads together. Yet still present as the face of a whole era players spent years inside. At that point, the games would feel less like current projects and more like a finished chapter that the company is politely closing. Did you know many players already talk about late-generation updates, as if they are ghost signals, small patches that arrive after the big marketing has moved on, but still change how a region feels in subtle ways, and Scarlet and Violet could easily receive one last round of those? Some claimed there would be a final cycle of Terra Raid events, themed around every remaining legendary and mythical, that never quite fit into earlier schedules, with one common rumor that a last, limited-time mythical distribution could be framed as a thank you gift from Paldea to anyone who logs in during a farewell window. Others have quietly said a complete edition, bundling the base game and DLC into a single cartridge or digital package for whatever hardware follows the Switch, would almost be expected by that point. Another rumor said that a final quality of life patch could arrive alongside that bundle, not to overhaul the games, but to smooth them out, with slightly better performance in crowded towns, a cleaner Terra Raid interface, or a few expanded options for boxes and move reminders, framed as a final act of care for this particular region. According to some, this rumor likely stems from how late patches worked for earlier titles on the Switch, where performance touch-ups and UI tweaks appeared long after launch, and players noticed that the games felt calmer and more stable, even though the core content stayed the same. If that kind of farewell update existed, it would pair neatly with a short montage segment in the Pokémon Presents itself, the sort of slow, nostalgic reel that cuts between key story moments like the treasure hunt opening ceremony, the Area Zero descent, and the final battle with the AI professor, all interspersed with quick flashes of fan-favorite characters and maybe even curated player screenshots or fan art. Although the rumors are false that developers hide secret codes in these segments, many would still pause the video frame by frame, searching for hints of future regions in the background of Paldean memories. From there, the tone would naturally shift, because as one flagship fades, the space around it tends to fill with spin-offs, side experiments, and legend-style projects that carry forward specific ideas, rather than entire generations, and the calm farewell to Scarlet and Violet could be used as a bridge into those quieter and stranger announcements that might follow. What kind of experimental title would they dare to place in that open space next? So after that gentle farewell to Paldea, some players might expect the camera to swing straight to Unova. But there is another path the presentation could take, one that feels quieter and a little stranger, as if it is slipping in through the side door while everyone is waiting for remakes. Instead of a return to black and white, the main console logo might fade into something that only hints at a Legend-style project, but in a region no one quite predicted. Imagine the screen opening on a misty coastline that feels like Johto, with the bell tower only half built in the distance and flocks of flying-type Pokemon drifting past in near silence. Or a windswept plateau in Kalos, where the ruined weapon from X and Y is still under construction, its core pulsing faintly in the twilight. Some claimed a completely new land could appear instead, a frontier mentioned only in item descriptions or throwaway NPC dialogue, the kind of place players have heard of but never seen, shown only through long shots of forests, ruins, and distant lights. According to some, a minimalist trailer like this, with almost no text and no narrator, would say more than a traditional logo splash. In that kind of announcement, the focus would not be on a full Pokédex or competitive formats, but on a bridge between generations, a game that experiments with mechanics, exploration, and lore, while the next mainline title quietly finishes development off stage. Did you know many internal projects are said to begin as small prototypes built around one idea, like weather, camera movement, or NPC schedules, before they ever become full games? A Legend-style side project could be framed the same way. A testbed for traversal options, open-ended quests, or a new way of tracking regional myths. The reveal itself might feel unusually calm for Pokemon Day, almost like late-night public television rather than a hype reel. Long, unbroken shots of snowfall over a Johto shrine, wind moving tall grass on a distant Kalos hillside, or rain beating on an unfamiliar regional variant could replace the usual montage of battles. One common rumor is that if the music is soft enough and the footage slow enough, players will instinctively lean closer to the screen, paying more attention than they would to a louder trailer, even as they drift towards sleep. A smaller side project could also be the place where the developers quietly test new battle systems, like positioning-based attacks, shared health between partners, or even limited co-op exploration where two players move through the same overworld without turning it into a full MMO. Though none of this would need to be explained in detail on Pokemon Day itself. Another rumor said that a narrator might only mention new ways to journey together, while the footage briefly shows two silhouettes crossing a bridge, a pattern interrupt that invites speculation without confirming anything concrete. Although the rumors are false more often than not, this kind of restrained teaser would fit the softer side of a presence, the part where smaller, to cozy spin-offs usually appear between the mainline giants. Not every announcement has to be a generation-defining reveal. Sometimes the most memorable segments are those quiet experiments that arrive with almost no fanfare, and the next part of the presentation could easily lean into that softer rhythm even more. From there, the presentation could slip into something even quieter, the kind of segment that feels closer to a late-night memory than a headline, as older players start to remember sitting with a DS or a worn-out cartridge and letting a slower, softer Pokemon game fill the room. Did you know some still talk about Mystery Dungeon or Ranger in the same hushed way as the Lavender Town rumors? Not because they were scary, but because those stories felt strangely personal, like the screen was paying attention to how players felt rather than how quickly they could clear a route. In Mystery Dungeon, the pace was different from the very first question, as the personality quiz asked if players would help a friend in trouble or stay home, if they were honest, timid, or brave. And according to some, that opening sequence said more about them than any trainer ID ever could. One common rumor is that the quiz secretly tracked real-world behavior, and that choosing the wrong answers would lock players out of certain partners, though this was easily debunked once data miners mapped every result. Yet the feeling of being read by the game never quite went away. For Pokemon Day 2026, a new mystery dungeon could appear with almost nothing more than darkness, the sound of waves, and a single line of text asking, "Do you often do things at the last minute?" And that alone would be enough for many to recognize it instantly. Some claimed a full remake collection might arrive instead, a quiet bundle that lets players revisit the GBA and DS entries with smoothed-out sprites and a gently remastered soundtrack, the sort of thing introduced by a short trailer in the middle of the presents, framed almost like a found diary rather than a blockbuster reveal. Another rumor said that a small epilogue chapter could bridge older Mystery Dungeon worlds to a modern region, tying them to whatever mainline announcement surrounds the segment without needing a huge budget or a long explanation. Ranger sits in a similar space in players' memories, a series defined less by catching Pokemon and more by drawing circles, calming wild partners, and helping with small, local problems, and a modern reinterpretation could lean into that cozy task-based rhythm. Instead of frantic stylus loops, a 2026 Ranger might focus on gentle motion controls or simple button prompts, almost like a nature walk. And some have said that tying it to a photography-focused mode in the spirit of Pokemon Snap or New Pokemon Snap would fit the current trend of low-pressure games that feel safe to watch right before sleep. Spin-offs like these are usually revealed with short, self-contained trailers placed between heavier segments, and over the years, players have learned to expect that pattern. Mainline tease, then a quiet interlude, then something larger again. These palate cleansers rarely dominate the marketing, however their calm tone often lingers, especially when they echo the broader cross-media plans that surround Pokemon Day. Even a small mystery dungeon prologue, a Ranger-style side story, or a photography app that links to a console save file could ripple outward into anime shorts, TCG minisets, or themed events. And the next part of the presentation would likely show how those gentle echoes line up with the mobile games that quietly mirror every console announcement on that February morning. Those gentle echoes usually arrive first through the phones in players' hands, because for several years now, almost every Pokemon Day presentation has paused for a kind of mobile interlude, a quiet roll call of every app that keeps the brand awake while the big console projects sleep. Did you know that even on years with no new generation reveal, Pokemon Go, Masters EX, Cafe Remix, Unite, and now Pokemon Sleep almost always receive a short, carefully timed segment, as if the broadcast is checking in on each one before moving on. The pattern is so consistent that some claimed you can feel it coming just from the pacing of the video. The screen fades to black, a clean logo appears, and a calm narrator starts to list dates and bonuses in that steady, matter-of-fact voice. For GO, there might be a sentence about a week-long Pokemon Day event, Double Catch XP, and a new mythical encounter. For Masters EX, a mention of a special anniversary scout with a limited sync pair. For Cafe Remix, a gentle promise of new outfits and a themed menu, while Unite flashes a few seconds of a new playable Pokemon dashing across the map, and Sleep quietly shows a new sleep-style icon drifting onto the screen. According to some, though these segments feel almost like modern versions of the old TV commercials and magazine blurbs that said a special event would only be available for a limited time, because the announcements are usually focused on short windows. A weekend raid rotation, a 2-week story event, a month-long anniversary campaign. Another rumor said that certain mobile banners were secret hints for future regions, though this was easily debunked when anniversary sync pairs and seasonal costumes failed to line up with later console titles, showing that most of these announcements are meant as celebrations rather than coded messages. Still, the structure stays familiar. One common rumor is that the order of the apps in the video matters, but what actually matters is that each one delivers a small hook, a new legendary or mythical debuting in raids, a Unite license for a fan-favorite starter, cross-game tie-ins that match whatever main console project is being highlighted that year, and sometimes even a shared campaign where logging into multiple games rewards a single themed item. These pieces act as connective tissue, keeping players checking in every day, collecting bonuses and fragments of story, while the next generation or the next Legend-style experiment slowly takes shape off-screen. As Pokemon Day 2026 approaches, that means any grand reveal for a new region or a black and white era return would almost certainly be mirrored in these mobile clips. And the sleepiness of the presentation might deepen as the focus narrows onto one app at a time. The next part of this slow walkthrough settles on Pokemon Go, and the question becomes whether those familiar raid eggs and event maps could be hiding the first mythical of a new region, or even a quiet return to Unova, waiting just behind a single tap. From there, the familiar globe of Pokemon Go would quietly spin into view, and longtime players might remember how Pokemon Day has already shaped this app over the years, with boosted Kanto spawns, themed raid bosses, and short research lines that led to mythical encounters like Mew, Celebi, and Meloetta, often timed around movie tie-ins or new game promotions. Did you know some even linked these calm mobile events to older rumors, saying that GO had become the new way to distribute the secret Pokemon that older cartridges were supposedly hiding all along? Historically, each February 27th has turned the overworld map into a kind of anniversary diorama, with confetti in cities, starter-focused tasks, and a timed research quest that, if completed step by step, would quietly hand players a mythical that once required link cables or special cartridges. Some claimed that this was the modern version of the old event kiosks, except now the line formed digitally, and instead of a mysterious cartridge, the reward appeared at the end of a progress bar. The presentation in 2026 could easily show a trainer avatar walking through a familiar square, the camera tilting just enough to reveal a new silhouette in the encounter screen, then cutting to the logo before anything is fully confirmed. By that point, several mythicals and legendaries might still be waiting for a grand GO debut, depending on how far the main series has advanced. A short trailer could show a distorted portal in the sky hinting at Hoopa, or a forest shimmer that suggests Zarude, or even a crystalline skybox that implies a new generation's cover legendary, framed as a special raid day. According to some, a single frame of an unfamiliar wing or tail in that footage would be enough to fuel weeks of frame-by-frame analysis, much like players once did with magazine screenshots that hid poke god shapes in the background. Another rumor said that a region-themed event could arrive in lockstep with whatever main console game is highlighted that morning. Perhaps a return to Unova, if remakes or sequels are being promoted, or a legend-style setting with period-appropriate outfits. In that case, the map might gain Unova-inspired decorations, rotating raids featuring that region's dragons, and avatar costumes that echo the new protagonist designs. One common rumor is that a new region reveal would instantly flip the geomap to feature that region's starters worldwide, though this is more of a wish than a pattern. Alongside creatures and costumes, Niantic could quietly announce quality-of-life changes in the same segment, framed in a matter-of-fact way. Expanded raid tools with clearer difficulty indicators, more precise AR, tracking for buddy snapshots, or calmer social features that let players schedule remote raids days in advance instead of reacting in real time. This rumor likely stems from earlier updates that were slipped into short trailers, where a new button or icon sat on screen for only a moment, then was noticed later by careful viewers. As the focus shifts away from walking and raids, the presentation might drift toward a different kind of mobile story, and Pokémon Masters X would come into view, with its narrative cutscenes, voice lines, and sync pair spotlights suggesting a quieter, character-driven style of Pokémon Day announcement. From there, the camera would feel like it is stepping indoors, away from the roads and weather, into the quieter theater of Pokémon Masters EX, where the rumors are not about hidden maps or secret buttons, but about which trainers will stand under the anniversary spotlight this time. Did you know many players now treat Pokémon Day almost like a fortune-telling ritual for Masters, watching the banners and key art to guess which sync pairs will quietly reshape the meta for the rest of the year? Over the last few anniversaries, patterns have formed, and some claimed these patterns could be read like a schedule. One common rumor is that an anniversary must always bring a protagonist in a new outfit, a villain redeemed in dramatic fashion, and at least one legendary trainer with a glowing limited-time costume. According to some, if a new mainline region or remake is close, Masters EX will echo it first, giving players an alternate outfit champion or a themed duo that makes the console game feel closer, even if the developers never say this outright. For Pokémon Day 2026, that means many would be watching for a quiet confirmation of the next era. If a fresh region has already been revealed, players might expect its protagonist to arrive early on Pazio with a partner starter and a festival-style outfit. The way earlier events made it feel like certain characters stepped out of the anime before their own episodes aired. If the rumor mill keeps circling around a Unova return, or a Legends-style prequel, another rumor said that anniversary sync pairs could dress long, familiar champions in period clothing, or give villain leaders partner legendaries that match a yet unseen box art silhouette. The Pokémon Presents segment itself would probably only show a few seconds of new story. Maybe a shot of the trainer lodge at night, a legendary silhouette over the ocean, or a brief argument between rival characters whose dialogue is cut off mid-line. This rumor likely stems from how earlier trailers teased crossover arcs with the anime and console plots, offering just enough context that players could guess which game or series was being echoed. However, this was easily debunked whenever data miners found unused lines pointing in different directions, reminding everyone that Masters EX often plans farther ahead than the rumors assume. Alongside the story hints, a narrator might calmly outline a few system updates in a way that sounds almost like patch notes being read as bedtime stories. New battle modes could be mentioned first, perhaps a slower, turn-based challenge, where players face rotating legendary gauntlets with fixed teams, followed by quality-of-life tweaks such as faster skip tickets, expanded team presets, or a way to favorite entire formations instead of only individual sync pairs. Some claimed a Pokémon Day would finally bring visible pity counters or adjusted gacha rates, and although the rumors are false so far, a subtle change to anniversary banners, like guaranteed seasonal units after a set number of pulls, would fit that quietly generous tone. As the Masters X segment fades, the presentation would likely drift toward even softer experiences, almost like a cool-down after the intensity of anniversary banners and legendary battles. The visuals might shift from Passio's neon arenas to the warm interiors of Pokémon Cafe Remix, with latte foam shaped like familiar faces, and then to the dim blues and purples of Pokémon Sleep, where Snorlax rests under a starry sky. In that gentle transition, the focus would move from competitive lineups and sync grids to small, cozy rituals. Arranging pastries for visiting Pokémon, tracking sleep styles, and listening to calm background music that makes the rest of the announcements feel distant, as if players are already halfway to dreaming about the next reveal. From there, the camera could drift gently into the world of Pokémon Cafe Remix, where instead of battle cries and damage numbers, players are met with warm colors, soft piano loops, and tiny Pokémon carefully sliding plates of pancakes across a wooden counter, as if the whole game was designed to feel like the quiet 10 minutes before a cafe closes for the night. The puzzles stay simple and looping, almost hypnotic. And did you know that on past Pokémon days, the most exciting moment here has just been a new staff Pokémon quietly stepping through the door, or a familiar partner appearing in a seasonal outfit that looks like it was stitched together from in-game pastry wrappers? The 2026 presentation could follow that pattern, with the announcer calmly revealing a themed event that mirrors the year's main console release. Perhaps a region-inspired festival, where the cafe's windows show the silhouette of the new legendary in the distance, or where the menu adds a parfait based on a key town from Generation 11. According to some, these small crossovers feel more magical than the big trailers, because they turn massive, world-ending storylines into latte art and tablecloth patterns, maybe even adding limited-time decorations shaped like gym badges, or NPC accessories that players recognize at a glance. One common rumor is that certain decorations quietly affect which Pokémon visit first, though this is usually left unconfirmed, so players just arrange furniture by instinct and superstition. In the middle of louder announcements about ranked modes and DLC raids, this kind of segment would act as a soft pause, a reminder that not every update has to demand perfect reflexes or daily login streaks to matter. Instead, the screen would linger on a slow pan across the cafe's interior, letting players notice tiny ambient details, like steam drifting from a teacup, or a drowsy Eevee nodding off in the corner, and the narration could lean into that, almost inviting listeners to imagine the smell of baked bread instead of the sound of cheering crowds. Another rumor said that a future Pokémon Day might bundle all of these gentle titles together as a cozy block, and 2026 would be an ideal time to test that idea. Right after the Cafe Remix news, the Direct could pivot into something new, but similarly slow, a gardening or decorating spin-off, where players cultivate berry fields behind a Pokémon Center, or arrange cabins and lanterns in a forest that slowly fills with visitors over time, each one bringing small stories instead of battle challenges. This rumor likely stems from the growing popularity of slow-life games, and although the rumors are false so far, a short teaser with no release date, just a few shots of soil, stars, and sleeping Pokémon, would fit perfectly between Cafe Remix and the already drowsy mechanics of Pokémon Sleep, easing the presentation even deeper into late-night territory before the next wave of reveals. From there, it would feel natural for the presentation to settle fully into night mode, and that is where Pokémon Sleep in 2026 quietly waits, half game and half bedside ritual, turning your rest into a kind of slow research log, where players study dozing Pokémon instead of battling them, and wake up with new visitors and new entries instead of experience points. The core idea is simple enough that many already know it, though on Pokemon Day, it could be dressed up with a gentle twist. Did you know special anniversary sleep styles could be announced? Like a Pikachu curled around a tiny birthday cake, or a mythical Pokemon only appearing on the final night of a limited event if your sleep has been steady all week. Because the app already talks about sleep research, some claimed that a mythical-focused campaign would arrive sooner or later, and Pokemon Day 2026 would be the safest place to reveal it, framed as a calm challenge rather than a grind. Imagine a week-long, mythical sleep survey, where players are encouraged to maintain consistent bedtimes, with soft in-game reminders and no harsh penalties. And each completed night nudges a hidden meter closer to unlocking a rare encounter with something like Jirachi, Darkrai, or even a new regional form that only appears in dreams. One common rumor is that Darkrai would be used for a jump scare style event. However, this was easily debunked by the app's overall tone. So any mythical campaign would more likely lean into quiet stargazing menus, slow lullaby remixes, and a final cut-in of the Pokemon simply watching over the player's sleep. According to some, cross-game rewards are almost guaranteed, and Pokemon Day is where those connections tend to be spelled out in careful, comforting language. A short trailer could mention that logging a full week in sleep during the anniversary window might grant a themed sticker pose in Pokemon Go, a commemorative trainer outfit in Masters EX, or even a shared cosmetic symbol that appears in profiles across several titles, turning a private bedtime habit into something that has a faint echo in daytime games without forcing anyone to engage more than they want to. Another rumor said that sleep data would one day change wild spawns and geo hour by hour, though this is still false. So a smaller perk like bonus, Pokeballs, candy, or limited research tied to well-rested days feels more believable and more in line with the app's slow pace. Alongside these events, a brief Pokemon Presents segment could quietly confirm quality-of-life updates that have been whispered about since launch. Improved tracking for short naps and irregular schedules, new lullaby tracks based on classic route themes, and perhaps a bedtime story mode, where an in-universe professor narrates simple tales about how certain Pokemon fall asleep in the wild. This rumor likely stems from how many players already use the app as background audio, and although the rumors are false so far, a narrated mode would fit the franchise's recent push toward cozy, low-pressure features. As this drowsy portion of the show fades out, it also sets up a different kind of rhythm, because while mobile and sleep apps manage the daily cycle of taps, alarms, and logins, the anime and web series carry the narrative cycle, and those too have a habit of shifting on Pokemon Day in ways that can be far stranger than any sleep event the games could track. So as players think about daily logins and sleepy bonuses, the other rhythm quietly ticking in the background is the story itself. Because did you know, the anime almost always bends around the games, like a tide pulled by unseen release dates rather than the moon. From Kanto to Paldea, each new mainline generation has eventually brought a fresh region tour, new companions, and a soft reset of the journey. Sometimes arriving right alongside the games, sometimes drifting in a few months later, once players already knew the map by heart. Looking back, some claimed the original Kanto saga felt separate from the cartridges, but over time, the patterns became harder to ignore, with Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, and Kalos all mirroring gym lineups, league structures, and even specific routes, while Alola and Galar shifted into looser interpretations that still promoted regional forms and gimmicks. Paldea continued this habit, tying in terrestrialization and academy life. So by Pokemon Day 2026, many players will expect the current era to either be closing out its Paldean arc or sliding into something more experimental, perhaps a Unova revisit that echoes any black and white remakes or an entirely new region aligned with a Generation 11 reveal on new hardware. According to some, the calmest kind of announcement would be the most effective here. Not a loud trailer, but a short, almost dreamlike clip buried in the present stream. You could imagine a slow pan across an unfamiliar skyline at dusk, a strange coastal city, or a reimagined Castilia with different lights, the camera lingering just long enough for fans to freeze frame every building. Then, for only a second, a new companion silhouette steps into view, or a familiar voice from Unova speaks a single line, hinting at a returning character whose role is unclear. Another rumor said that a faint regional theme, rearranged in minor key, could play under static, leaving players unsure whether they heard it correctly at all. At the same time, the modern anime ecosystem is no longer just a single weekly show, so there is room for side stories that sit between cartridges and remakes. One common rumor is that a Legend-style game almost demands a matching OVA, perhaps a short streaming series about an ancient king, a past professor, or the origin of a mythical Pokemon shown only in murals. This rumor likely stems from how previous web series, like Origins and Generations, quietly explored corners of Kanto, Johto, and beyond, filling in gaps that the main anime never touched, and many would expect something similar if 2026 highlights a remake or a historical spin-off. Although the rumors are false until the moment a trailer appears, Pokemon Day has also become a place where anime updates are paired with movie news, even if movie now means a streaming special instead of a theatrical release. And that pattern gently points players toward the next kind of announcement the presents could hide. From there, players can quietly look toward the side of the franchise that does not always dominate headlines, but still shapes how the world of Pokemon feels. The movies, the one-off specials, the short web series that drift onto streaming services with a single key visual and a date. Did you know past Pokemon Day broadcasts, or presentations just before and after, have sometimes slipped in a movie teaser almost as an afterthought? A few seconds of footage and a logo that fans would then dissect for months. In earlier years, theatrical films received traditional trailers, but more recently, streaming-focused projects have taken that role, with present segments showing a piece of key art or a short scene, often narrated over in a way that reveals very little. Some claimed that this meant the anime side was shrinking. However, this was easily debunked by the steady stream of specials tied to anniversaries, regional spotlights, or mythic Pokemon, which continued even when the main series quietly changed formats in the background. By 2026, players could be watching for a different kind of reveal, one that reflects how Unova is returning in the game lineup. Then one common rumor is that a Unova-focused remake movie, perhaps retelling the story of N and the Dragons with a slightly altered continuity, could appear as a stylized streaming film, with only a logo and a single shot of the Ferris wheel shown on Pokemon Day. According to some, a Legend-style lore special is just as likely, something that treats an ancient hero, the original dragon, or the abyssal ruins as a slow, atmospheric episode that fills in gaps the games only hint at. Another rumor said that instead of tying into any one game directly, the next special might follow a standalone trainer wandering between regions, touching Unova, Paldea, and whatever new setting is active by 2026, so that the anime can bridge eras without being locked to a single season. These projects do not need long explanations. A narrator could simply say that a new adventure is coming to streaming later in the year, while still images linger on ruined castles, subway tunnels, or a lone Pokemon Center at night. Players have already seen how short web series, from Pokemon Generations to Twilight Wings and Origins, can arrive with almost no warning, announced through a title card, a few stills, and a quiet promise that episodes will drop online. This rumor likely stems from how those series reinterpreted familiar gym leaders and champions with more mature framing. So when a new web project is teased, many will expect something similar. Self-contained vignettes that expand the world without rewriting it. Cross-promotion can make these small reveals feel larger. Codes shown briefly in an episode could unlock a themed terror raid, a commemorative outfit, or a special distribution of a story-relevant Pokemon, while in-game news updates might remind players to watch the next chapter when it releases. Although the rumors are false until the moment the stream confirms them, this gentle loop between anime, web episodes, and live service events naturally leads into another part of the franchise that mirrors those shifts in its own way. The trading card game, where new sets silently echo whatever story the rest of Pokemon is telling. In that quieter corner of the franchise, the trading card game tends to move like a tide in the background. Yet if players pay attention, each wave of cards hints at where the rest of Pokemon is heading next. And Pokemon Day 2026 could be one of those moments where the tide suddenly turns. Did you know the TCG has quietly organized itself into blocks or eras for decades, with names and symbols that usually shadow the current games, regions, or mechanical focus, even when that connection is never stated outright on the cards themselves. From the early E-card and EX blocks, through Diamond and Pearl and Black and White, up to the more recent Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet eras, each block carried its own visual language, rarity patterns, and rule tweaks, so players could almost date a card at a glance. One common rumor is that these shifts happen randomly, but the timing usually lines up with hardware changes or a generational reset. So according to some, 2026 feels like the right time for a fresh symbol in the corner, tied either to a brand new Gen 11 region or a deliberate return to Unova imagery that many said would complete a long nostalgia loop. If the main presentation shows even a few seconds of the next console title, the TCG segment could echo it with a soft reveal. Maybe silhouetted starter Pokemon on a mock booster pack, or a logo for a new block that hints at a Legend-style historical aesthetic, with parchment textures and older Pokeball motifs. Some claim that a Legends-inspired block would never work because the card game is already abstract. However, this was easily debunked by past sets that leaned into themes like tag team partnerships or terrestrial crystals and still felt coherent. Alongside that, Pokemon Day often uses TCG time to show concrete products, so players might see starter decks built around the 3 new starters, each with a simple but slightly exaggerated gimmick that mirrors their in-game roles. There could be elite trainer boxes decorated with region landmarks, like a distant Unova skyline or ruins from a myth-heavy legend setting, and special collections centered on a new mythical Pokemon, bundled with a pin, a jumbo card, and a download code for an in-game event that many would immediately try to data mine. Mechanical hints tend to slip in here as well, so another rumor said that the next block might introduce a new card frame or a hybrid type that reflects a console mechanic, such as terrain control, time distortions, or partner techniques. This rumor likely stems from how GX, V, and Terra-stylized cards all previewed or mirrored game systems, and players could see a new rule box, an altered first-turn rule, or a once-per-game action that feels like using a signature feature on the new hardware, although the rumors are false until the cards are physically printed and tested in tournaments. Because the TCG is also a living sport, any block announcement on Pokemon Day would almost certainly blend into talk of championships, side events, and festival spaces, gently shifting the presentation from cardboard previews toward real-world gatherings. It creates a quiet bridge from imagining what might be inside a sealed pack to imagining where players might be sitting when they open it. which leads into another kind of announcement that often shares the same stage and sometimes the same convention center walls, but carries its own stories and rumors in the physical world. From there, the focus usually drifts from products on shelves to the places players might gather, because Pokémon Day has quietly become a moment where schedules, cities, and stages are revealed just as carefully as any new creature or mechanic. Did you know that in recent years, the rhythm has settled into a familiar pattern, where locations and dates for the World Championships, regional circuits, and special tournaments for VGC, TCG, and Unite are outlined in a calm list that still shapes an entire competitive season? Players have grown used to a certain cadence, where a February presentation might confirm the host city for Worlds, hint at its key art, and then move outward to name major regionals, international championships, and occasional one-off invitationals that sound like rumors at first because of their scale. One common rumor is that every format announcement hides a secret test for the next generation, though the reality is usually more mundane, with TPC explaining which sets will be legal for TCG, which rule sets VGC will follow, and how Unite's seasonal tournaments will rotate maps and featured Pokémon. By 2026, that structure could still hold, but the theme wrapped around it may feel very different, especially if the competitive year is tied to a new region, a return to Unova, or even a Legends-style setting. Some claimed that a Unova-focused Worlds would mean a stage dressed like Castilia's skyline, with giant digital billboards looping trailers and champion replays, while a Legends-themed event could lean into ancient ruins, carved stone logos, and eerie flute motifs between matches. According to some, even the promo cards and key art would mirror this, with staff promos drawing on regional myths and opening ceremonies using music stings that hint at yet unrevealed forms. Alongside the big offline plans, Pokémon Day itself tends to carry its own smaller, time-limited rituals, and 2026 would almost certainly continue that habit. Online competitions with unusual rule sets, like restricted dex formats that only allow Pokémon from a specific era, or doubles ladders that quietly test a new battle gimmick, could appear as banners in-game for players to join over the following weekend. In Pokémon Go, synchronized global raid days often appear, and there is a quiet expectation that a mythical or regional variant could headline a 24-hour window with cosmetic rewards, avatar items, or even a themed pose granted for participation. This is also where future rule shifts can be teased without fully explained context, which gives the whole thing a slightly urban legend feeling. Another rumor said that subtle clauses in a tournament document once foreshadowed an entire mechanic. And although the rumors are false in most cases, Pokémon Day rule previews really can prepare the scene for an upcoming generation by adjusting time limits, banning certain abilities, or introducing a new item clause that only makes sense once players see the next game's features. Physical gatherings also create an easy bridge into another category of announcement, because a city chosen for Worlds, or a regional, often becomes the testing ground for new collaborations, merchandise lines, and cross-media partnerships. A host venue might be paired with a limited cafe menu, a fashion capsule, or even a small art exhibit that is announced in the same breath as tournament dates, and that, in turn, leads into the quieter world of tie-ins that can fill an entire Pokémon Day schedule without ever showing a single frame of gameplay. From there, the focus usually drifts toward objects that players can actually hold. And on Pokémon Day, that often means a quiet parade of merchandise that feels half like a catalog and half like a dream. Did you know that almost every anniversary broadcast tucks in a new plush line, often centered on the latest starters in multiple sizes? From tiny mascot keychains to oversized versions that barely fit on a shelf, shown in slow rotations against a white backdrop, while a narrator simply states their release window and where they can be ordered. Alongside those, the figure collections tend to appear in neat waves, with blind box sets of regional forms, premium statues of the year's highlighted legendary, and sometimes a full diorama that recreates a route or city from the current region. And the presentation style is usually the same. A quick montage, a few close-up pans across textures and bases, and a small overlay that quietly notes the price in yen and a month, rather than a specific day. Apparel collaborations slide in right after, with hoodies, jackets, and subtle patterned shirts that hide Pikachu silhouettes or type icons in the fabric, while themed accessories like controllers, console skins, and carrying cases are shown briefly docked to whatever hardware is current, suggesting that, according to some, the hardware itself is part of the celebration. Some claimed that the more high-profile collaborations are almost like rumors come to life, because players might have guessed them from trademarks or magazine spreads long before they are formally revealed. Fashion brands could lend their silhouettes to region-themed capsules, such as a Unova-inspired streetwear line if remakes are in focus, or a minimalist collection based on a new legendary's color palette, while lifestyle goods might include enamel cookware with evolution lids, or home decor, like stained glass-style lamps featuring mythical Pokémon in place of traditional motifs. These segments rarely dwell on any one item for long. Instead, they move in a steady rhythm, so that by the time players process one design, another has already taken its place. Beneath the larger announcements, there is room for more subtle collaborations that feel closer to the series' history. A music project might be teased with a single shot of a studio, a composer's name, and a date, hinting at orchestral arrangements or lo-fi remixes of classic battle themes, while an art exhibition or museum tie-in could appear as a brief logo for a natural history museum or contemporary gallery, paired with concept art from the Game Boy era to the present. One common rumor is that these quieter projects hide clues for future games in their key art, though this was easily debunked whenever staff interviews clarified that the selections were chosen for balance rather than secrets. Although the rumors are false, players still tend to look closely at every frame. Over time, as the product montage fades, the tone of a presence can shift again, like moving away from physical objects towards something less tangible but just as influential. The narrator might introduce a new app icon, a redesigned account system, or a cloud service update that promises to connect current games, mobile titles, and perhaps even whatever hardware follows the Switch. And this is where the announcements stop being about what sits on a shelf and start to reshape how players actually move their Pokémon from one generation to the next. From there, the focus would almost have to drift toward the quiet backbone of the modern series, the online services that sit in the background of every save file, and especially Pokémon Home, which has turned into a kind of invisible museum where players' partners from Game Boy, DS, and Switch all coexist in a single grid of tiny icons that carry decades of memories. Did you know some players already talk about Home less as an app and more as a kind of generational bridge, a place that decides which Pokémon are allowed to cross over into the next era and which are quietly left behind? So Pokémon Day becomes the natural moment to promise that those bridges will stay open a little longer, or that the rules for crossing them might finally soften. In 2026, a narrator could calmly reveal new compatibility for whatever follows Scarlet and Violet, perhaps a Generation 11 title or a remake, and then outline improved transfer rules in a matter-of-fact way, explaining that longtime partners from older cartridges would be easier to move forward, that regional forms and Paradox Pokémon would keep their identities intact, and that edge cases, which once confused many players, would finally be addressed in clear language instead of half-understood charts. One common rumor is that a future update could turn home into more than a storage box, adding collection showcases where players arrange themed exhibits, social trading hubs that feel like a slow, cozy version of a global marketplace, or even a built-in battle simulator that lets teams fight under standardized rules without needing a separate cartridge at all, though for now this remains speculation that sounds almost like the old stories of hidden modes on the title screen. According to some, the next step would be a unified account that quietly follows players from console to mobile to PC, syncing friend lists, wonder trade histories, and even event progress, so that a raid cleared on a handheld could unlock a bonus encounter in a mobile game. And cloud-based features would make it possible to pick up the same living Pokédex on whatever hardware comes after the Switch without a dramatic migration day. Another rumor said that this kind of system could finally bring better legacy support, with clearer timelines for when transfers close, archived notes explaining why certain Pokémon cannot move forward, and perhaps a promise that once a partner reaches a certain generation, it will never be locked out again. However, this was easily debunked in the past whenever policies changed without warning. So a Pokémon Day segment that patiently walks through new safeguards would feel almost like a quiet apology. Although the rumors are false for now, a calm presentation that ties all these threads together could end by hinting at something stranger. An entirely new type of Pokémon experience that lives mostly in the cloud. Not quite a mainline game, not quite a mobile spin-off. Maybe a persistent world, or a shared simulation, where home is only the doorway, and the narrator might pause just long enough to suggest that the next announcement will finally show what waits on the other side of that door. So after that suggestion of a doorway in the cloud, players could be guided towards something a little stranger. Because did you know? The Pokémon Company has quietly tested unusual formats for years, almost like small experiments scattered around the ecosystem. From Pokémon Go's early AR snapshots and buddy walks, to Pokémon Smile turning toothbrushing into a tiny battle, here to mobile toys and sleep tracking gadgets that blurred the line between game and routine. Some claimed these side projects did not matter, yet they slowly trained players to accept Pokémon as a presence that follows daily life, not just something locked to a cartridge. Looking at that pattern, a 2026 presentation could gently unveil a more ambitious mixed reality project, perhaps framed as a calm research initiative rather than a full game, where players step into a simple VR or MR space designed less like an action title and more like a quiet diorama. One common rumor is that a future headset experience would let players actually walk through a Pokémon Center, chat with NPCs, and watch their own team resting on digital beds. And although the rumors are false for now, the idea of a virtual hub where home data appears as life-sized partners standing beside the player fits the way the brand has evolved. According to some, even a minimal encounter simulator, where a single wild Pokémon appears in the room at real scale, would be enough to feel uncanny. Another rumor said that the next frontier would not be battles at all, but wellness and learning, extending the logic of Pokémon sleep into other quiet corners of the day, such as a mindfulness app, where a partner Pokémon mirrors breathing exercises, or a language tool where simple phrases are practiced by talking to NPCs from different regions. Some claimed there would be a fitness integration that tracks gentle walks with a PokéWalker-style device, rewarding consistency with small story scenes. And this rumor likely stems from how consistently Pokémon Go celebrates steps and exploration. None of these would need to be complex. They would simply use familiar creatures as reassuring companions in small, repeatable rituals. If such projects appeared on Pokemon Day 2026, they would probably arrive as very modest teases. Perhaps a short, slow trailer showing a first-person view entering a softly lit Pokemon Center lobby, a few UI mock-ups of wellness prompts, and then a quiet, now in development card that avoids any firm release window. However, this was easily debunked style of overpromising seen in old magazine hoaxes would be replaced by careful language, emphasizing that concepts may change, almost inviting players to treat the reveal as a glimpse behind the curtain rather than a finished product. From there, the presentation could pivot back toward structure, using this experimental interlude as a low-intensity valley in the emotional arc, so that earlier segments about updates to existing games feel grounded, and later segments about a new generation or a major remake can rise again like a second peak. It would sit in the middle of the show, between concrete content and long-term visions, and the narrator could then hint that the next segment returns to more traditional territory. How a 2026 Pokemon Presents might stack its mainline announcements one after another until the final logo fade. From there, players could imagine the presentation dissolving into darkness before a soft piano line begins and a slow montage of the series fades in, moving from the dot matrix Game Boy screen to the Switch era, then to whatever hardware exists in 2026, while a calm narrator thanks players for 30 years of Pokemon memories and quietly welcomes everyone to Pokemon Day 2026. It would feel less like a hype reel and more like an opening storybook page, giving a sense that something important is about to be added to that history. Did you know the order of announcements can change how the entire show feels, even if the content stays the same? In this imagined flow, the first major reveal would almost certainly be mainline or Unova news, perhaps a brief, enigmatic trailer for a Generation 10 title on new hardware, or a black and white remake that lingers on familiar Unova streets. This heavier, lore-rich piece could lean into mood and mystery, then shift to a slightly more detailed gameplay segment or developer message, before the narrator gently says that there is also news for players who enjoy different kinds of adventures. That line would mark the turn into spin-offs, where something like a new Legend-style project or a relaxed side game could appear, balancing the intensity of a new generation with cozier footage of exploration or photography. After that, the rhythm could dip again, as the voiceover adds a micro-transition such as, next, a small update, moving into shorter segments about ongoing console titles or minor modes, so the earlier impact has time to settle. According to some, this kind of pacing helps players remember more, because the mind is not constantly pushed to the same emotional peak. From there, the narrator might say, "Meanwhile, on mobile," and the visuals would slide into Pokemon Go, Masters EX, Cafe Remix, Unite, and Sleep, each getting a compact, clearly framed Pokemon Day event. One common rumor is that these segments are just filler, though they often hide small mechanical changes or rare distributions that many later regret skipping. The tone here would stay light, with bright colors and simple dates, before easing into anime news, a TCG expansion tied to the new region, and a short glimpse at themed merchandise or online services. Throughout, the pacing would alternate between dense, lore-heavy reveals and gentler, almost cozy announcements, so players never feel overwhelmed. Another rumor said that saving one last surprise for the end is predictable. However, this was easily debunked by how often those final logos still catch viewers off guard. In this version, the narrator might pause, thank players again, and then let one more teaser appear without words. A remaster shadow drop, a tiny hint at long-requested features, or a mysterious silhouette that fades before anything can be confirmed, setting up the final stretch of possibilities. That silent teaser fading to black creates a different kind of tension, because players have now been trained to expect one last phrase. And sometimes that phrase is not a distant date at all, but the quiet shock of available now. Over the last decade, did you know several Pokémon Day broadcasts have ended with content that could be downloaded the moment the stream finished, turning a sleepy anniversary into an instant late-night session for anyone still awake? Some claimed the most memorable versions of this came from small updates and side projects, rather than mainline games, like when mobile titles received time-limited events that began as soon as the presentation ended, or when a puzzle game or theme dropped on the eShop without any prior rumor, giving players something compact to explore before bed. According to some, these shadow drops felt a bit like the old days of discovering a secret in a magazine, except now, the code word was simply watching the right timestamp and checking the store afterward. For 2026, one common rumor is that a smaller spin-off could appear in exactly this way. Perhaps a cozy, eShop-only title that focuses on taking care of Pokémon in a single town, or a minimalist roguelike dungeon where rental teams rotate daily. Another rumor said that a classic collection, gathering Game Boy or DS-era titles into a neat bundle on modern hardware, could be announced with a short montage and then released immediately, turning a long-requested feature into a sudden reality rather than a promise. Alongside that, players might see a major patch card for something ongoing, such as Pokémon Unite or Masters EX, with the narrator calmly explaining that a new mode, balance overhaul, or anniversary banner is live the moment the words leave the screen. The framing would be simple: a brief trailer, a clean card that just says available now, and a narrator spelling out what could be done tonight. Whether that means testing a reworked character, pulling on a special scout, or logging into a Pokémon Day festival mission. Although the rumors are false until the broadcast actually airs, part of the appeal is emotional rather than logical, because there is a specific cozy thrill in knowing that once players finish relaxing, something new is already waiting for them on the home menu. It turns the entire presentation into a kind of extended loading screen, and even if the shadow drop is small, the feeling of immediacy lingers, especially for those who remember staying up for midnight launches. This rumor likely stems from how often fans ask for older Pokémon titles to return, so any sudden release makes players hope the next surprise will be a long-requested remaster or port arriving without warning. If a modest shadow drop can happen, then a larger one might follow, and that possibility leads into another category of Pokémon Day wishful thinking. The dream that those classic adventures could finally step onto new hardware in one decisive announcement. So once players start imagining that decisive announcement, the rumor quietly shifts from single shadow drops to something larger. A future where the old journeys are finally gathered together on one modern system, instead of being scattered across aging handhelds and fading cartridges. In that half-awake space, it is easy to picture a calm narrator saying, "Did you know?" as a logo fades in for a so-called Pokémon Classics collection, promising that the past would be only a download away. In that imagined trailer, red and blue might appear first, their pixelated palettes smoothed just enough for a high-resolution screen, while still looking exactly as players remember from the Game Boy. Then, almost like a memory surfacing, gold and silver could slide into view, perhaps with crystal quietly included, followed by a brief flash of ruby and sapphire title screens, and maybe, according to some, a quick cut to darker DS footage hinting at diamond, pearl, and platinum. The shots would be short and suggestive, like the old days when some claimed every half second of a Japanese commercial was hiding the next secret. Then the pattern could break for a moment. Instead of another mainline title, the trailer might suddenly show the capture interface from Pokemon Ranger, or the distinctive grid of a mystery dungeon map, raising the question of whether spin-offs would share the spotlight. One common rumor is that such a collection would bundle everything from the Game Boy to the 3DS eras. But players who remember past announcements know that this is where reality usually narrows the dream. Technical and legal hurdles sit quietly behind that fantasy. DS and 3DS games depended on dual screens and touch controls, and some music or licensed features might be tangled in contracts from decades ago. Another rumor said that these problems could be bypassed with cloud versions, streamed from remote servers rather than running on the device itself. However, this was easily debunked for earlier hardware, though by 2026, cloud-based experiments on newer systems could make a selective approach more believable, with only certain titles offered natively, while others appear as streaming curiosities. If such classics did return, players would quickly wonder how they might connect to modern services. Did you know that even back in the Virtual Console era, there were event distributions tied to old games, like special mythical Pokemon transferred forward through Pokemon Bank and then into Home? In a 2026 scenario, some claimed that clearing the Elite Four in a reissued Gold or Silver could flag a hidden reward in Pokemon Home, or unlock a timed raid in the current generation, blending nostalgia with ongoing content in a quiet background way. Online trading, mystery gifts, or limited-time distributions could all be layered onto the classics, turning them into living museum pieces rather than sealed artifacts. And that thought leads naturally into another kind of announcement entirely, because not every celebration is something players can download. Some are places and moments, museums and concerts, that turn Pokemon itself into an exhibit. And those cultural showcases form their own kind of Pokemon Day reveal. So once games start to feel like artifacts, the next step is to place them in an actual frame. And Pokemon Day has already experimented with that idea in the real world, turning pixels and chiptunes into something closer to a traveling gallery than a product launch. Players might remember how the Pokemon orchestral concerts quietly reframed battle themes and route music as symphonic pieces, or how anniversary art exhibitions displayed concept sketches, logo drafts, and early sprite sheets under glass, as if red and blue were ancient texts instead of Game Boy cartridges. In past years, pop-up events have appeared in department stores and temporary spaces, where players could walk through life-size dioramas of Kanto forests or Galar stations. And did you know some even recreated Pokemon Center layouts with vintage CRT's looping commercials from the late 90s, blurring the line between store and museum? Another rumor said that certain pieces in those shows, like prototype Pikachu designs or unused logo mock-ups, hinted at future games, though this was easily debunked once staff confirmed they were pulled from archived art books rather than secret development builds. For 2026, with the 30th anniversary era still echoing, it would make sense for Pokemon Day to reveal a full traveling museum exhibition, something that could move from Tokyo to London to New York, carrying early design documents, original Sugimori paintings, and maybe even restored kiosks that once distributed event Pokemon on the Game Boy Color. According to some speculative reports, a global concert series could run in parallel, with orchestras performing region-themed suites, while projection mapping shows routes, towns, and mythic Pokemon across the walls, turning each performance into a kind of living Pokédex entry. In a presence broadcast, that sort of announcement would likely appear as a slower, almost dreamlike segment, cutting from quiet shots of gallery halls being set up, to close-ups of framed key art, to musicians rehearsing familiar melodies that players recognize before the title cards even appear. The camera could linger on fans interacting with installations, watching as children trace their hands along a timeline wall from red and green to whatever generation exists in 2026, while older players stand a little longer in front of the Game Boy displays, as if checking that their memories were real. Tie-ins would almost certainly follow because the Pokémon Company rarely treats these cultural projects as isolated. Exclusive merch could be sold only at the exhibition venues, perhaps museum-style prints, enamel pins modeled after region badges, or replica tickets based on in-universe trains and ferries. One common rumor is that attending these events might unlock in-game items, like a unique Pokeball skin or a special stamp on a trainer card. And even if that remains false, digital souvenirs feel likely, such as downloadable wallpapers, AR filters, or timed raids in Pokémon Go that activate when players scan a code in the lobby. For those unable to travel, a digital exhibition could be teased, letting players wander a virtual museum of Pokémon history through a browser or console app, exploring rotating rooms themed around each generation with commentary from developers. This rumor likely stems from earlier online art showcases and music streams, but it would fit a pattern, slowly shifting Pokémon Day from a single announcement video into a season of curated experiences. As the presentation moves on from these cultural reveals, the tone would naturally turn inward, inviting players to think about how nostalgia is managed, how innovation is staged, and how every new project must decide which memories to preserve and which boundaries to quietly cross next. From that wider cultural pattern, players can quietly zoom in on a smaller, more fragile balance at the heart of Pokémon Day 2026. The tension between those who want faithful returns to the past and those who now expect every big project to feel like Legends, or like a fully open region with no loading gates, no fixed routes, and almost no hand-holding at all. In practice, it becomes a question of how much comfort the presentation offers, and how much curiosity it dares to stir up in the same hour. Did you know one common rumor is that a single event, like a black and white remake, would somehow ruin the chance for a Generation 11 reveal, as if the schedule could only hold one major project at a time, even though past years have shown that remakes, Legend-style spin-offs, and mainline games can overlap. Some claimed that if a Unova remake appears, it must be a frame-by-frame recreation, while others quietly hope for a Legends Kyurem structure, with a fragmented timeline and experimental mechanics. And the truth is that any real announcement would have to live between those expectations, rather than fully on one side. A carefully structured Pokémon Day could lean into that balance by giving players one obvious nostalgic anchor, one clearly forward-looking project, and then several smaller, stranger reveals in between. According to some industry watchers, the nostalgic slot might be a very direct remake on whatever follows the Switch, while the experimental slot might be a teaser logo for Generation 11 or another Legends game, and mobile updates, TCG sets, and anime arcs would then act as connective tissue, echoing both the old and the new in smaller, safer ways. The way trailers are edited would quietly reinforce this. A remake or nostalgia piece might open on familiar pixel motifs, slowed-down versions of classic route themes, and slow pans over locations players remember from the DS or Game Boy era, with clear shots of gyms, rival encounters, and starter selection to say, without words, that nothing important has been taken away. A more experimental project, however, could favor wide, foggy landscapes, half-seen silhouettes of new Pokémon forms, and quick glimpses of unusual mechanics, cutting away just before answers appear, so that the dominant feeling is a kind of gentle unease rather than instant recognition. Clear messaging would matter just as much as the footage. Developers' captions and voiceover could explicitly state that older content is being preserved, respected, and even archived in new ways, while also inviting players to discover untold stories or see familiar regions from a different angle. Language that nudges curiosity without dismissing the comfort of routine battles and badges. Another rumor said that pushing innovation too far would erase the series' identity. However, this was easily debunked by how Legends Arceus still felt undeniably like Pokémon, even as it bent almost every structural rule. If players imagine Pokémon Day 2026 as a single, continuous stream, this balance becomes easier to picture minute by minute, and the next part of this audio documentary will quietly walk through that hypothetical presentation as if it had already aired, reveal by reveal, including one final announcement that many said could never happen. So players can imagine the stream beginning very quietly, as if it had already been waiting on the screen all along, a black background giving way to a soft, grainy montage of Game Boy footage, then DS battles, then the more saturated glow of the Switch era, each generation appearing for only a heartbeat before fading into the next, while a slow piano version of the classic Pokémon Center theme plays underneath, like a lullaby stretched across 30 years. Did you know? The Pokémon Company has used this same February date, Pokémon Day, for almost every major anniversary presentation since 2016, turning a simple release anniversary into something that feels closer to a ritual than a marketing beat. After a few minutes, the montage would settle on Unova, on that stark black and white title screen, on N's castle rising in the distance, and some claimed that even a single frame of a new skyline could be enough to send chat into chaos. Though on this imagined morning, the camera would move gently, not urgently, across familiar routes and bridges. The Pokémon Presents logo would appear with its soft chime, and a calm host, perhaps speaking over a minimalist studio background with only a Pikachu plush and a framed red and green cartridge behind them, would welcome players to Pokémon Day 2026, thanking them for watching whether they were starting their day or falling asleep to the broadcast. Then, almost without warning, the first big reveal would begin, not with shouting, but with a slow fade to black and the distant sound of a train, as if the Unova subway were pulling out of some unseen station on new tracks. A single line of white text might appear in Japanese first, then in English. The Unova region enters a new era. According to some, this kind of wording could hint at either a remake or a Legend-style prequel, and the trailer would lean into that ambiguity, showing only silhouettes of familiar city skylines, a lone trainer standing on the marvelous bridge at sunset, and a new, unseen Pokémon shape briefly crossing the moon before vanishing into static. One common rumor is that a Gen 10 teaser would arrive instead, tied to whatever system follows the Switch. But in this quieter version, the information would stay deliberately thin. A logo treatment, a vague release window like coming in 2027, and a promise of more details later in the year, perhaps at another dedicated Pokémon presence. The music would swell just once, revealing nothing else concrete, and then the image would dissolve back to the host, who would calmly restate the title, the year, and that players could look forward to more news before the end of 2026. Here the pattern would briefly break, a pattern interrupt in the middle of the sleepiness, as the host shifts from mainline speculation to something smaller but still mysterious. Introducing a new Legend-style project that does not try to overshadow Unova or Gen 11, but instead complements them, perhaps focusing on an older region only seen in side material or on a forgotten era of Hoenn, long before the battle frontier was built. Another rumor said that a spin-off could quietly anchor these presentations, and this imagined trailer would show slower shots of ancient ruins, hand-drawn maps, and a single Pokeball being carved from unfamiliar wood, while a narrator describes a time before gyms, when catching Pokemon was closer to folklore than sport. Although the rumors are false in this case, the rhythm of the announcements would feel familiar. Major project, then atmospheric spin-off, then a gentle pause, as the host thanks players again, and hints that the next segment will look at how existing games, mobile titles, and the wider anime and TCG will connect to these future adventures. The screen would soften into the Pokemon Presence logo once more, the music dropping to almost nothing, and the imagined broadcast would hold on that image as if it were about to continue, before this section of the audio documentary quietly freezes the frame, promising to return in the next part to unpause the presentation and follow every smaller reveal, one by one, like the next page in a serialized bedtime story. So the frozen frame on the Pokemon Presents logo would quietly melt back into motion. And instead of returning to something huge or dramatic, the imaginary show would ease into a softer reveal, almost like turning a page to a lighter chapter, as gentle marimba notes and watercolor backgrounds fade in behind the narrator's voice. Players would see a hand-drawn dungeon corridor, torches flickering in pastel colors. And did you know, many would instantly recognize the rounded silhouettes of partner Pokemon before any title actually appears. The camera would follow a small team of familiar creatures, walking in formation through a misty cave, and the logo for a new mystery dungeon game would slowly assemble from glowing runes, signaling a cozier interlude between the heavier announcements, with the narrator calmly explaining how this entry focuses on shorter, bedtime-length expeditions, shared rescue passwords, and maybe a tiny eShop prologue that acts as both demo and side story. One common rumor is that a photography-focused spin-off could return instead, with players quietly trailing wild Pokemon through slow, seasonal environments. But either way, the tone here would stay gentle, colorful, and almost lullaby-like, the kind of segment that feels designed to let attention drift without missing anything urgent. As the mystery dungeon footage fades, the music would lift into a brighter, slightly more synthetic arrangement. And according to some longtime viewers, this is usually the signal for the mobile block, a part of the show that many expect, yet rarely remember in detail afterwards. Pokemon Go would appear first, with quick shots of a Pokemon Day 2026 event, boosted spawns of starters across multiple generations, a time-limited research line tied to whatever the current flagship game is, and perhaps a tease that a mythical from that title could appear in raids for one weekend only. Some claimed there might be a global challenge, where players collectively walk a certain number of kilometers to unlock extra bonuses, though this kind of prediction tends to repeat every year. From there, the rhythm would become almost hypnotic. Pokemon Masters. EX flashing up a banner of anniversary sync pairs, maybe a special outfit for a classic champion, then Cafe Remix quietly announcing new staff Pokemon that drift into the kitchen, followed by Unite patch notes sliding past in neat minimal text, promising balance changes and a themed quick battle mode. Even Pokemon Sleep would receive a tranquil little segment, with a narrator describing limited-time sleep styles, bonus biscuit drops, and a calm reminder that logging rest during the Pokemon Day week could unlock a commemorative in-app sticker. Although the rumors are false that these segments ever hide secret game announcements, they still create a steady pulse that fills the middle of the presentation. However, this was easily debunked by past broadcasts, the idea that the mobile block means nothing else is coming, and the imagined video would lean into that tension by ending this stretch with one last fade to black, before a quiet voiceover returns to promise that the anime and the trading card game are still waiting just off-screen, like unopened booster packs in the final act of this hypothetical Pokemon Day story. So in this imagined stream, after that quiet fade to black, the screen would return with soft music and a title card for the anime. Almost as if the broadcast wanted to remind players that the games are only one part of a much larger story, and that the world on the other side of the screen keeps moving even when the console is asleep. You would see quick, carefully chosen cuts, a new protagonist standing on a cliff above a misty coastline, a partner Pokemon that looks just unfamiliar enough to suggest a future region tied to Generation 11, and a distant city whose skyline mixes traditional rooftops with strange, crystalline towers. The narrator would speak slowly about a new arc, following this trainer's first steps in a region that has not yet been named. And according to some speculative captions, the tone would be described as quieter and more reflective, focusing on small-town legends and half-forgotten myths. Did you know many players already expect the anime to tease locations or forms before the games? So every shot of a new route, every unfamiliar background Pokemon, could be frozen and dissected later, as if the broadcast itself were a puzzle left on screen for fans to decode. From there, the video would slide into the trading card game without fanfare, and the logo for a new block would appear, perhaps something like Prism Legends or Eclipse Chronicles, echoing the rumored themes of time, memory, or parallel histories that might define 2026. Key art would show the day's headline, Legendary posed against that same coastline from the anime teaser. And some claimed that the way the waves were drawn would hint at a terrestrial-style mechanic returning in card form, with crystal borders and layered foil patterns that mirror the main game's battle effects. Short flashes of card designs would follow, just long enough for players to notice that starter Pokemon from the new region share framing and color palettes with the anime's opening shot. And another rumor said that alternate art versions would feature scenes from the first episode of the new series, turning each booster pack into a fragmented storyboard of the journey. Then the pace would quicken into a montage. Plushes of the new starters stacked in neat rows, apparel lines that quietly reference older regions with faded badges and coordinates, and accessories like phone cases and shoulder bags drifting across the screen. In between, there could be a brief announcement of a traveling exhibition or concert series, maybe a symphonic event that plays music from every generation, which some claimed would debut in late summer to match the rumored game release window. Just when it feels finished, the presenter would pause and mention one more thing, and the screen would go dark again. A single, unfamiliar, legendary cry would echo. A faint silhouette of a region map would appear for less than a second, and a mysterious logo with no text would flicker like a half-remembered rumor, before vanishing without explanation. The stream would close with calm thanks for watching, a reminder of event dates and pre-order windows, and a final lingering shot of that coastline at dusk, inviting players to wonder what, if anything, from this hypothetical presentation might one day match reality, and what secrets are still being held back for the next reveal, just out of sight. From that quiet, fading coastline, players could imagine the screen staying dark just a little longer, not to hide a new logo, but to confirm something that some already suspected. This might be a Pokemon Day without Generation 10 at all, a year where the next region remains just out of reach, waiting for different hardware, different timing, or simply more development breathing room behind the scenes. Did you know that, according to some industry patterns, new generations tend to align with fresh Nintendo systems, so a delay would not feel like a strange rumor, but more like a careful calibration, giving the teams time to polish technology, test new mechanics, and avoid rushing a flagship title onto hardware that is about to be replaced or has not fully settled into the market yet. Some claimed in past cycles that a missing generation reveal would mean a quiet anniversary. However, this was easily debunked by years where remakes, DLC, and spin-offs filled entire presentations, suggesting that the Pokémon Company could decide to let remade regions and legend-style experiments breathe, rather than forcing them to share oxygen with a brand new number and a brand new Pokédex. In that version of 2026, the stream could open with an unbroken focus on Unova, perhaps expanding the earlier Coastline teaser into a full trailer for a second Legend-style game or a more traditional revisit, showing familiar bridges, subways, and industrial skylines under new lighting, while narrators talk about hidden histories, lost roots, and side stories that many players never saw the first time. Instead of cutting to a bold Generation 10 logo, the camera would linger on Unova's maps and battle screens, then shift into updates for current titles. Maybe one last quality of life patch for a recent mainline game, or an additional challenge mode that revisits older gym leaders. Something that feels like an echo of past rumor lists about secret post-game dungeons and unreachable towers finally made real. A mid-presentation segment could quietly move through mobile titles, with Pokémon Go announcing a Unova-wide celebration, Masters X focusing on black and white era champions, and smaller banners for Cafe Remix, Unite, and Sleep, turning what some would call filler into a connected web of events that all point back to the same region and its themes. Then, almost as a pattern interrupt, the stream might pause the game footage entirely to reveal anime shifts, a new Unova set arc with updated character designs, or a TCG block that reimagines classic EX cards, reminding players that Pokémon Day has always been about cross-media life, not just cartridge icons and console dashboards. One common rumor is that without a new generation, the company would try to overcompensate with exaggerated language, though a more likely approach would be the opposite. Weeks in advance, official posts might gently stress updates on current titles and celebrations of ongoing adventures, quietly steering expectations away from world premiere regions and toward deeper dives into what already exists. Although the rumors are false that every Pokémon Day must end with a new number on screen, the tradition of using this date to show how the franchise continues to evolve across games, shows, and cards would still hold. And players drifting off after such a presentation might notice that, even without Generation 10, the feeling of a living, expanding world is still there, humming beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when the next logo finally appears. As the imagined direct fades, that question hangs in the dark. When the series does move on to its next era, which of these quieter threads will be carried forward, and which will be left behind as another kind of rumor, half remembered by players who were there on that unusually patient Pokémon Day? Did you know some players imagine a very different Pokémon Day, 2026? Not quiet and patient at all, but the kind of broadcast that changes the series overnight, where the logo fades in, the music slows, and instead of a small teaser, the entire main segment becomes Generation 10. In that version, the narrator would calmly say the words, "New Region," and a long, carefully edited trailer would drift across the screen, showing a new land tied to whatever hardware follows the switch, with wide shots of cities, forests, and coastlines that players would pause and study frame by frame. In that imagined direct, the camera would linger on 3 new starters, each posed in a way that already suggests personality, with one common rumor being that players could guess their hidden abilities just from their animations, even though those details would probably be clarified later on the official site. According to some, the trailer might quietly reveal a new battle gimmick, a revised open-world structure, or even a gentler difficulty curve, all wrapped around a firm late 2026 release window, so that the entire presentation orbits this single, heavy announcement. The pacing would slow, the music would swell, and everything else that day would feel like it was rearranged around that center. Once the region has a name and a logo, the rest of the show could start echoing it, with mobile games suddenly aligning themselves like satellites around a new planet. Pokémon Go might tease a multi-month event where mysterious silhouettes from Gen 11 appear as root cameos before their full debut, while Masters EX could announce a special sync pair from the new professor and rival, said to arrive from a faraway land players will soon explore. Even the TCG would join in, revealing a first mini-set themed around the new starters, with card art that quietly shows buildings, signs, and wild Pokémon from the region, long before players walk those routes. The anime could follow the same pattern, with a short teaser of the next saga's protagonist standing on a cliff in the new region. Wind in their hair, a Gen 11 starter at their side, and another rumor said that a shadowy legendary would appear for a single frame, encouraging frame-by-frame analysis that keeps forums busy for months. Older arcs, like the Paldea-era stories, might receive final specials or epilogues, gently nudging viewers to accept that those journeys are now part of the past, preserved, but no longer at the center of attention. For existing games, a high-impact Gen 11 reveal would quietly move Scarlet and Violet, and any Legends titles, into a legacy role, with farewell campaigns that feel almost ceremonial. Players could see one last Terra Raid cycle, build as a closing chapter, or a final in-game festival that brings back event Pokémon and rare items, turning those cartridges into something complete rather than unfinished. This rumor likely stems from how earlier generations often ended with mythical distributions and final tournaments, signaling that competitive focus had shifted, even though the games themselves remained playable and beloved. To bridge the gap between eras, the Pokémon Company might use this moment to unveil new online systems, with a redesigned home interface that treats Gen 11 as the default view, and older regions as gently archived collections. A new competitive format could be introduced, restricted to the new Pokédex for the first season, while another ladder keeps legacy formats alive, allowing players to move at their own pace. Some claimed that a cross-platform battle hub could finally appear, unifying handheld and console experiences, though that remains speculation. Compared to the quieter scenario, where Pokémon Day 2026 focuses on polishing what already exists, this version feels louder, sharper, and more immediate, like the sudden arrival of a long-discussed rumor, instead of the slow confirmation of small details. Although the rumors are false for now, imagining both paths shows how the day can feel special in different ways, either by honoring a familiar era or by stepping decisively into the next. As the possibilities branch, another question starts to form in the background, about how players might react if expectations and reality drift too far apart, and what happens to a community when its predictions do not quite come true. When players think about expectations drifting away from reality, there is another, quieter thread that often appears in the background. And it is about connection rather than prediction, about how all these scattered Pokémon experiences might one day feel like parts of a single, gentle event instead of separate islands. Right now, there is a kind of cross-platform celebration on Pokémon Day, but it is fragmented, a set of parallel lines instead of one continuous path. Did you know that most current cross-game events are stitched together with simple tools, like serial codes shown in a presentation, themed campaigns that share key art, or matching bonuses spread across Go, Masters EX, and whatever console title is active at the time? Players might enter a code from a Pokémon Day stream to get a mythical in Scarlet and Violet. Then open Pokemon Go to find a short research story about the same creature, while Masters EX runs a limited-time banner with that Pokemon Sync pair, all of it connected in name and timing, but not in actual progression. It feels linked, though each game keeps its own memory. By 2026, some claimed that this could evolve into something more ambitious, almost like a single Pokemon Day questline that quietly moves from screen to screen. Imagine beginning with a special research in Pokemon Go, catching a featured partner under a commemorative skybox, then transferring a token from that research into a console game, where a short side story unlocks only if the Geo step has been cleared. And finally, according to some, Pokemon Sleep could recognize both of those flags and add a third layer, perhaps a dream-themed encounter or a rare item that only appears after several nights of consistent rest. Each step would echo the others, so that finishing one would cause subtle changes in the next. For that kind of structure to exist, unified accounts and cloud services would need to do more than just store save data. They would need to quietly track which Pokemon Day chapters players have touched and which ones are still waiting. One common rumor is that a future Pokemon Home update could become the central diary for these events, logging not only species and forms, but also where they were obtained during a multi-game celebration, turning the whole ecosystem into a single, slow-moving festival. In that picture, every login on that February morning would feel like opening another door in the same hallway. There is also a softer angle that many rarely say out loud, a wish for these connections to feel kind rather than demanding. Pokemon Sleep already turns rest into progress, and by 2026, sleep data could gently unlock small bonuses in other games, like calm background tracks, lowered encounter rates in certain areas, or extra camp items that encourage slower play. Another rumor said that long raid marathons or competitive events might include in-game reminders to pause, stretch, or rest, tying back into sleep in a way that is more about wellness than grinding. Although the rumors are false for now, this interconnected vision hints at what players might secretly hope for from Pokemon Day 2026, beyond any specific title or feature. A sense that their time, their habits, and their quieter moments are being noticed and respected across every game they touch. As that idea lingers, it leads naturally into another possibility, about how the celebration might extend beyond software altogether, into broadcasts, concerts, and live spaces that blur the line between watching and playing. As those imagined broadcasts and concerts fade out in your mind, players are often left with something quieter than trailers or logos, a set of soft wishes that return every year around Pokemon Day, almost like a ritual. Did you know? Many of the most common hopes are not for new creatures at all, but for the way the series treats the ones that already exist, and the people who try to connect through them. One common rumor is that a future presentation will finally promise an online experience that feels as carefully built as the single-player journey, with smooth trading, stable battles, and tools that actually let friends find each other without workarounds. Some claim that Pokemon Day 2026 could be the moment a narrator calmly acknowledges past frustrations, then shows redesigned lobbies, clearer matchmaking, or even gentle filters for competitive play, so players who only want relaxed matches are not thrown into high-pressure formats by accident. Another rumor said that remakes, if they appear, would be introduced with a kind of visible respect, not as a rushed obligation, but as a chance to revisit music, maps, and characters that many still remember frame by frame. According to some, a black and white project or another classic region could be shown alongside short comparisons, where camera angles linger on familiar alleys or bridges, almost inviting players to notice what has been preserved instead of only what has changed. Quietly, underneath those expectations sits another wish, that more people could actually play. Many said that a perfect Pokémon Day segment would pause between big reveals to outline accessibility options in plain language, scalable text, colorblind-friendly indicators, remappable controls, optional hints for puzzles, or modes that ease repetitive inputs for players with limited mobility. None of these would be dramatic on their own, however. This was easily debunked as unimportant once players began sharing how much even a single toggle could change their experience. Linked to that is the hope that future games are simply given time. Some claimed that a narrator mentioning performance and polish out loud, even in a careful corporate way, would feel like a small shock, as if an old rumor about the company truly listening had finally come true. Although the rumors are false in the literal sense, the feeling behind them shows how players look to Pokémon Day, not just for announcements, but for reassurance that the series is evolving thoughtfully rather than frantically. In that imagined presentation, there might be a short, nearly whisper-quiet interlude where developers or artists appear on screen in a studio filled with sketches and prototype models, speaking slowly about the first Pokémon they drew as children, or the moment they realized someone on the other side of the world would meet a character they designed. A composer could describe layering a new root theme over a faint echo of an older melody, while concept art drifts by, and those details would gently humanize whatever trailers bookend the segment. Some players even hope for tiny gestures that cost almost nothing. A brief montage of community fan art with names and small captions, a line about a long-running challenge community, or a spotlight on a player who used Pokémon Sleep to rebuild a healthier schedule after burnout. These things would not change sales charts, but they could make the direct feel less like a broadcast from far away, and more like a conversation that has been going on for decades. As all of those wishes settle, Pokémon Day 2026 starts to feel less like a list of reveals and more like a yearly check-in with an old, sometimes frustrating, but strangely comforting friend. The video in your mind has now walked through almost every corner of what that day might hold, from grand announcements to the smallest on-screen nods. Yet there is still one last space left to explore, a final possibility that sits just outside the usual predictions and rumors, waiting at the edge of the closing logo. So from that quiet edge beyond the usual predictions, the view pulls back a little, and players can slowly see the full map of what has already been imagined. Every path of Pokémon Day 2026, laid out like routes on a region map, each one faintly glowing in the dark. In one direction, there are the mainline possibilities, the big, headline moments that many would expect first, like a brief Gen 11 teaser that only shows a logo, a distant skyline, and perhaps a single call from an unfamiliar cry, leaving players to fill in the missing details as they drift. Nearby, another path loops back to familiar ground, where Unova remakes or a new Legend-style experiment stand side by side. One common rumor is that these projects would arrive between generations as a kind of bridge, revisiting old stories while quietly testing new ideas. Even Scarlet and Violet still sit on the horizon in this map, with late-life updates and small patches or a final in-game event that could feel like a soft farewell rather than a sudden stop. Further along, the routes become softer and more fragmented, as spin-offs and side projects cluster together like small towns between major cities, each with its own sleepy light. Here, Mystery Dungeon returns in players' minds as a full remake or a brand new entry, while Ranger, photography games, or even a quiet, cozy app about caring for Pokémon in a slow, daily rhythm Wait as gentle possibilities, almost like background music. Did you know some claimed that a new AR or VR experience would eventually let players stand inside a Pokemon Center or walk through a forest of virtual Oddish at actual scale? Though for now, these ideas remain more like distant shapes than confirmed plans. Closer to the center of this imagined map, the ongoing services and mobile titles form a kind of constant heartbeat, steady and predictable, yet still capable of small surprises. Pokemon Go events tied to Pokemon Day, Masters EX banners with carefully chosen sync pairs, limited time campaigns in Cafe Remix and Sleep, and even expansions to home or cross-platform bonuses, all line up as quiet but realistic announcements, the type that are rarely shocking but always present. According to some, even a small quality-of-life feature, like easier transfer paths between games, could feel strangely important late at night because it changes how all those digital creatures move between memories. Around the edges, the anime, the TCG, merchandise, and live events create a soft frame, like the border art on an old guidebook page. New anime arcs, a movie hint, or a web series could echo whatever the games reveal, while the TCG prepares new blocks and special Pokemon Day products, and plushes, concerts, exhibitions, and championship details round out the picture, turning that single February date into a cross-media echo rather than just a game announcement. Another rumor said that a surprise concert or art exhibition would one day be streamed directly after a Pokemon Day presentation. However, this was easily debunked in the past, yet the idea still lingers as a pleasant possibility. By now, players have quietly walked through almost every realistic corner of that day, from mainline titles to the smallest campaign, enough that the imagination can gently color in any gaps. The exact lineup will remain unknown until the moment it appears on screen, although the rumors are false until proven otherwise. But with this wide, calm map in mind, the final space beyond it all can feel even more mysterious, as if one last, unexpected announcement is still waiting just past the closing logo, in the dark. So now, instead of chasing that last hidden slot on the map, players can let the whole idea of Pokemon Day 2026 soften, as if the entire presentation is turning into a hazy, comfortable picture in the distance, a cozy morning that already exists somewhere ahead of the calendar, just waiting to be unwrapped when the date finally arrives. Rather than tracking which rumor points to Generation 11 or which pattern might mean a black and white remake, it can help to picture something much simpler. A quiet room, a screen slowly fading in from black, and the familiar Pokemon logo, glowing like a nightlight. In that softer image, the exact order of announcements does not really matter, and the timeline of trailers and logos starts to blur, the way memories of old Nintendo Directs sometimes merge together in hindsight. Did you know many players already mix up which year brought which reveal, remembering only the feeling of surprise or the way a single shot of a new region stayed in the mind afterward? In the same way, Pokemon Day 2026 can become less about guessing whether a Legend-style spin-off appears, or whether Scarlet and Violet receive one more mode, and more about the calm certainty that at least one moment on that day will land just right. Some claimed that if every prediction failed, the day itself would somehow feel wasted. But this is its own kind of myth, a quiet, eerie modern cousin to the old playground stories about secret Pokemon hiding behind Bill's house. Another rumor said that missing a favorite feature or remake would make the entire event feel empty. However, this was easily debunked each year that passed, as many players still found themselves smiling at a single unexpected animation, a small quality-of-life patch, or a brief glimpse of a new anime arc tied to the current protagonist. Although the rumors are false, They show how easy it is to treat speculation like a checklist, instead of a cloud that drifts and changes shape. So it can be gentler to hold a different mindset, one where curiosity does not demand answers, and where it is acceptable to let questions stay unanswered until the morning they are meant for. According to some, then the most relaxing way to approach Pokemon Day is to imagine standing just outside the presentation, hearing only the faint echo of music through a door, knowing that whatever plays inside will still be there when players are ready to open it. In this slower place, it is fine not to predict every mobile update, every TCG tie-in, or every cross-media collaboration. It is enough to know that something will be there, waiting. As this thought settles, the pacing of the night can slow as well, each breath stretching a little longer, each mental image of logos and trailers dimming at the edges. And before this section fades completely, there is one small thing that could shape how this moment is remembered later, if sleep has not arrived yet. A quiet decision made in the background, about what kind of feeling to carry forward when Pokemon Day 2026 finally appears on the calendar, like a bright, familiar icon. From that small decision, the next step is even softer, almost like adjusting a menu setting in your mind, rather than pressing a real button, as players are quietly invited to imagine a single announcement that would make that distant Pokemon Day 2026 feel perfect. Not a full direct, not a dozen trailers, just one reveal that appears in the darkness behind closed eyes and sits there, steady and clear. For some, that imagined moment could be a logo for a brand new region, a faint title card for a Generation 11 adventure on whatever hardware exists after the Switch, with only a distant cry of a new starter echoing over a quiet field. Others might picture a return to Nova, a black and white remake, or a Legends-style spin-off that slowly pans across the Sky Arrow Bridge at sunset, the camera drifting as if it does not want to wake anyone. According to some long-running expectations, a calm voiceover hinting at a new era would already feel like confirmation, even if no gameplay is shown at all. Another player might prefer something smaller, almost mundane on the surface, like a gentle update for Scarlet and Violet that adds a few extra side quests, or a modest Legend-style epilogue episode that ties up a loose thread from an earlier game. Did you know many of the most cherished Pokemon Day memories are not the biggest reveals, but the quiet confirmations that a favorite region, character, or mechanic has not been forgotten? In that sense, a simple patch note screen drifting across the mind, by listing new quality-of-life changes, could be just as satisfying as a brand new title. Some claimed that the ideal announcement would not even be a game at all, but a new anime season teaser, or a short, atmospheric web series set in an older region that never quite got this kind of spotlight. The trailer fading in on an abandoned battle facility, or a quiet Pokemon Center at night. Others might imagine a collaboration event in Pokemon Go, Masters EX, or Unite, a limited-time raid or banner that brings back a favorite legendary with a new twist. Even though these mobile updates often feel routine when seen in a normal waking news cycle, whether that private reveal is ambitious or modest, realistic, or completely impossible, it can simply rest there as a personal rumor, a story only one person has heard. One common rumor is that if a wish like this is spoken out loud in a comment, it becomes more real. But in this case, it does not need to be posted at all. It can stay as a quiet note to remember when the real presentation begins months from now. Although the rumors are false in a literal sense, the act of imagining them is part of what keeps the series present between releases. The same way schoolyard myths once filled long gaps between official news. As this imagined trailer plays for the last time, the edges can start to blur, like an old VHS recording of a Pokémon commercial slowly losing focus. The rating screen in the corner fades, the logo dims, and the music lowers, until it is only a suggestion of a melody, barely there. Whatever announcement appeared can stay in memory, but it does not need to be held tightly. It can drift away like a canceled broadcast, leaving only a faint afterimage of color and sound. With fewer details to track, thoughts can move more slowly, each idea arriving with more space around it, like sparse dialogue boxes in a late-night cutscene. The next sections will continue to move through possibilities and patterns, but from here, the story can unfold at a distance, as if players are only half watching, half dreaming, letting Pokémon Day 2026 slide further into the comfortable space between rumor and reality. From that distance, it might feel like the details of each possible announcement have started to blur together a little, like overlapping rumors from different playgrounds and different eras, and that is completely fine, because this quiet walk through Pokémon Day 2026 was always meant to be something players could drift through rather than study. Thank you for staying with these possibilities, for letting each hypothetical trailer, each gentle logo tease, each imagined direct segment play out in the background, while thoughts moved more slowly than usual. Some listeners might already be half asleep at this point, with only fragments of earlier sections left in focus, maybe remembering a mention of a Generation 11 reveal, or a Legend-style return to an older region, but not the exact order or the exact timing. And that is how this kind of late-night speculation tends to work. According to some, long videos like this could almost become their own kind of ritual, where players only catch every third sentence, or close their eyes during a description of a new anime arc, or a fresh TCG set, and wake up several announcements later. If certain segments went by unnoticed, or if attention wandered during the discussion of mobile events or cross-media collaborations, there is no need to rewind or correct anything. The core idea beneath every rumor, every careful guess about what the Pokémon Company might choose for that February presentation, has never been about predicting correctly or about being able to say that a specific DLC, a specific remake, or a specific mobile update was called in advance. Instead, the focus has been on the calm process itself, on moving slowly from one plausible reveal to the next, like walking past posters in a dim hallway, noticing the shapes and colors without needing to memorize the text. Although the rumors are false in the sense that none of these announcements exist yet, the act of arranging them, comparing them, and quietly imagining how players would react can still feel strangely comforting. Did you know? Some claim that the most relaxing way to enjoy this kind of speculation is to treat it like an audio diary of possibilities, something that can be revisited on different nights, with different sections coming into focus each time. There are other long, slow videos built around Pokémon myths, hoaxes, and fake leaks. And another rumor said that returning to them later, or letting them play softly while drifting off, could create a familiar background of half-remembered trivia and gentle debunks. If this style of slow Pokémon speculation feels cozy, those other recordings can wait quietly for whatever evening or late-night train ride needs them. From here, only a few soft sentences remain, and then the audio will likely begin to thin out, like a rumor fading when morning arrives. The next section will move even more quietly, giving players one last chance to let Pokémon Day 2026 settle into that space between waking and dreaming, before everything finally goes still for the night. From here, only a few soft sentences remain, and then the audio will likely begin to thin out, like a rumor fading when morning arrives. And as that happens, players can let their own thoughts start to thin out too. not by force, but the way a long day of exploring in a Pokemon region finally settles when the music in a route begins to loop for the third or fourth time. There is nothing urgent left to track, no trailer frame to pause on, no secret code to decode in a logo. So before anything else, let the next breath come in a little slower than the last, and as it leaves, let the shoulders drop just a bit, as if setting down a backpack full of cartridges, strategy guides, and half-remembered rumors about hidden Pokemon that some claimed could still be found if players just pressed the right buttons. Any last guesses about Generation 11, about remakes, about cross-media events can stay if they feel comforting, though they can also drift, like text boxes that finally finish scrolling and wait quietly on the screen. Pokemon Day 2026 will arrive whether players stay up watching every countdown or fall asleep halfway through a rerun, and it will bring whatever it brings in its own time, on its own schedule, with or without anyone refreshing news feeds in the dark. Tonight, there is nothing that needs to be done for it. No event that could be missed in sleep. No announcement that will vanish if players look away for a few hours. Instead, imagine a small, familiar room with the lights off, curtains pulled just enough to keep the outside world to a soft blur, and in the middle of that darkness, only a handheld screen glowing quietly in the hands of a tired player. On that screen, a favorite save file is open, maybe from a mainline adventure, maybe from a spin-off, the party lined up in the menu, a starter that has been there since the first route, a legendary caught after dozens of attempts, or maybe just a single low-level Pokemon waiting near the beginning of a journey that never needed to be finished. Now, according to some, the closest thing to a real secret in these games is that feeling when the overworld music plays at a low volume and the character stands motionless in a town square, not progressing any story, simply existing. And did you know that many players remember that stillness more clearly than the final battles? In that imagined room, the console could be set gently beside the pillow, the screen dimming, the last notes of the soundtrack looping once, then again, until they blend with the quiet of the house. Outside that small circle of light, the idea of Pokemon Day continues, distant and harmless, like a notification icon that will still be there in the morning. Another rumor said that the most dedicated fans never sleep before big announcements. However, this was easily debunked by all the times players woke up to news and still felt the same excitement, the same curiosity, the same pull to see what had changed. So whether this audio is playing for someone who is already half asleep, or for someone using it as a kind of background comfort while doing something else, the wish is the same. Let the body be a little heavier, let the thoughts move a little slower, and let the room feel just a bit quieter than it did when the video began. One common rumor is that staying alert until the very end somehow unlocks a hidden scene. But here, there is no bonus, no secret, only the permission to let attention wander, to let the mind step away from screens and schedules. In the distance, the imagined Pokemon Day logo can fade, its colors softening, its edges blurring, until it is only an afterimage behind closed eyes, while the music that once seemed bright and celebratory grows smaller and more distant, like a festival heard from several streets away. Although the rumors are false, it can feel as if the whole presentation is waiting for each individual player to rest. Yet in truth, it will simply continue existing whether anyone is awake for it or not. By the final seconds, there is no recap, no list, no next video to click, just the sense of the audio drifting off at the same pace as the listener, like a handheld console slipping into sleep mode in the dark. For now, Pokemon Day 2026 can stay somewhere just beyond the edge of dreaming. close enough to be pleasant, far enough not to be urgent, while the night belongs only to breathing, to stillness, and to the quiet promise that when players wake, the adventures will still be there, waiting patiently on the other side of the title screen.